Oh, yeah. Yeah, you did the right thing today. You pressed play on Stand Up Daily. Smart move, friendo. Joining me today, comedian and cultural commentator, because it's Friday, Finnegan Fridays, Christian Finnegan. Also, author and human rights lawyer, former congressional candidate in the state of Virginia, Qasim Rashid. I am Pete Dominic. It's time to stand up with me right now. Stand up. Yeah, you made it to Friday. If you're listening on Friday, you might be listening on another day. Either way, happy to have you here. Great to see a bunch of you over, I think it was like 45 people there last night at our Stand Up with Pete Dominic community hangout. The happy hour hangout takes place every Thursday at 8 p.m. And my guest, Qasim Rashid, also joined us at the hangout. Took a whole bunch of questions. We had a great conversation. It was great having him as our guest last night and today here on the podcast. Had great contributions from a whole bunch of listeners. Some new faces joined us in the Zoom hangout, and I hope you will. If you aren't already a paying subscriber, what are you waiting for? Come on, let's go. Sign up right now. $10, $20, $25, $5 even. Going once. I don't push it enough. I should push it harder, people say. This is how I'm making a living. 5 podcasts a week, 5 episodes a week, 2 guests a day, a robust news recap of the day before, and all done by yours truly. I book it, I host it, I edit it, I post it, and I'm happy to have you listening to it. But if you haven't already signed up, please do consider signing up for a paid subscription. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or you can find the paid subscription link in the show notes and sign up there, and you get access to and membership in our community of friends. And I'm really excited about this great community of folks and how much you're helping each other out and becoming friends with each other. It's really great and so gratifying for me, of course, to be in the host role of it all, if you will. So I've got a lot to talk with you about here today on a Friday. It's been a hell of a week. I hope that you had a decent week. I hope you found the good spots, the bright spots, the good things, the good people, the good moments, some good meals. I hope you slept good. I hope you got some exercise. And I hope that you had some good connections this week, some good experiences. I really do. I definitely did. My daughter made the volleyball team, which is pretty exciting for my family. I'm very excited about the new show dropping that I'm watching with my daughter, the Marvel Cinema Universe. What's it, the Captain America Winter Soldier. I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to the weekend. Lots of work to do in the garden, and that is where I am generally happiest these days, outside of being here with you on the podcast and anytime I'm with Val and the girls. Anyway, if you aren't, check in with us on the Discord platform if you are one of our subscribers and members, and connect with us there, because you're never alone when you're a stand-up member. Now, quickly to the email bag, I just wanted to mention a couple emails I got this week. Nicole Marchante said, "Thank you, Pete. I just had to say I absolutely love what you're doing with the end of the show, virtual hug. In case you don't know, it's been a kind of a secret, but at the end of the music, John Carroll's stand-up song, at the end of the show, I always include one more nugget in there of audio. And so check that out if you want. And you can go back and listen to old episodes and hear those little nuggets. Anyway, Nicole writes, "Thanks for entertaining, informing, and inspiring me and so many others daily. I've been a pretty passive stand-up community member thus far, but today I felt compelled to reach out and say how much I appreciate you and the show. Your hard work is not going unnoticed. Thanks for being so real and sharing your struggles and honest thoughts with us." Nicole was so sweet, and it really made my day. I love to hear from people who are kind of passive listeners and members of our community. It always feels great to hear from you, and I can't thank you enough. Very, very sweet. Thank you. Also want to share this with you because I don't talk as much maybe here on the show, I guess, about parenting as I used to. I'd like to get back to it and share stories with you and things I've learned, as so many of you have shared with me. But I got a really nice email from a listener named David J, who wrote, "Pete, I've been listening to you for years and I love the shit out of you." All right. I like that. I love the shit out of you too, David. It's a weird phrase, but I will take it. Thank you. Well intentioned, I'm sure. You have talked about books about raising daughters for years, and my dumbass never paid attention. And now I'm having a daughter, LOL. I'm hoping you can give me some good sources of raising a daughter so I'm not a total POS. Well, David, I responded to that email, but a lot of men out there have asked me about parenting, and I've learned so much from so many other men that are listeners of this show that have had kids before I did. So if you're a younger guy or whatever age, you're becoming a new parent, always love to talk with you. And I said, congratulations. This is amazing. Thanks for your kind words, David. The fact that you're curious and passionate about how to be the best girl dad that you can be is really, you can't ask for much more than that. So you're off to a great start, and I would highly recommend for new parents and parents of older children as well, the book Between Parent and Child by Chaim Ganat. Let's start there. It's not gender specific, but then you can get into so many other books about raising daughters with confidence and so many other experts that I've taught to. But start there, everybody. Always start there, and we can talk more if you want to email me. standupwithpete@gmail.com. I love your emails. Thank you very much. Keep them coming. I wish I could just read all of them that I get, but I don't want to bore you too much. All right, so let's get to, speaking of not boring you, hopefully what you're here for and happy to engage in listening, because I've got a good one for you. It is the last 24-hour in news. It's the recap I do. It's the last 24. All right, where do we start? Well, the U.S. is now on track to surpass President Biden's goal of administering 100 million COVID-19 shots by Friday. I think they absolutely under-promised and over-delivered. That's the whole goal. I actually even heard President Biden's chief of staff say that publicly as a strategy. Not a bad political strategy. President Biden agreed also to send about 2.5 million doses of the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine to Mexico. Mexico announced that it would limit access to its northern and southern borders, what with the spike in migrants coming up from Central America to our southern border with Mexico. The House approved a Dreamers bill, which Biden is going to push for support in the Senate. We'll see what happens with that. That's a pretty big deal. 75.5 million Americans have now been vaccinated, or at least one dose of the vaccine. 62% of the prioritized population, 22.7% of the total population. Have you gotten yours yet? The Senate confirmed William Burns as the next director of the CIA. He's a career diplomat who will take over the agency amid a moment of high tension between the United States and Russia. Joe Biden called Vladimir Putin a killer in an interview the other day, and Putin didn't much like that, but wished Joe Biden good health, which is not something you want to hear from Vladimir Putin, who poisons people all the time. And, you know, Joe Biden's old. I think that was a dig. Also, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Xavier Becerra, was confirmed by the Senate. So he will take over at HHS. But let's go back to Joe Biden's statement about the 100 million vaccine.
Hello, folks. Good to see you all. When I announced in early December I had a goal that I set of administering 100 million shots for the virus in the first 100 days of our office. 100 million shots in 100 days. It was considered ambitious. Some even suggested it was somewhat audacious. Experts said that the plan was, quote, definitely aggressive, and distribution would have to be seamless for us to be successful. One headline simply put it, quote, it won't be easy, end of quote. Well, it wasn't. When we took office, there was a lot that had to be done. We needed more vaccines, more vaccinators, more places for people to get vaccinated. And we needed a whole of government approach. So I directed Jeff Zients, the coordinator of our COVID-19 response, to put us on a war footing, and I meant that in a literal sense, to get us on track to truly beat this virus. And I'm proud to announce that tomorrow, 58 days into our administration, we will have met my goal of administering 100 million shots to our fellow Americans. That's weeks ahead of schedule, and even with the setbacks we faced during the winter storms.
All right, there was more to it, but pretty big effing deal, as Joe Biden said to his former President Barack Obama, after they passed health care. I did read this story, disturbing story. It's the first time I've been really outraged with something the Biden administration has allegedly done. It's reporting coming from the Daily Beast saying dozens of young White House staffers have been suspended, asked to resign, or place a remote work program due to past marijuana use. What? This can't be real. This can't be a real story. And if it is a real story, then they've got to reverse it and apologize. I mean, absolutely preposterous. And so I'm hoping the Daily Beast reporting here is somehow missing something. And if it's accurate, they're going to have to reverse this policy. So I just wanted to say that here because that's something from the last 24 as well. And we don't talk much about the last guy, last president, very, very much. But this is a funny story. A Ripley's affiliated wax museum in San Antonio, Texas, was forced this week to move a wax sculpture of former President Donald Trump into storage because guests kept punching it in the face. Oh my gosh. Why would you do that? That's like, wouldn't you be in trouble if you punched a wax sculpture in the face? I guess it's worth it. Must seem worth it. It's unclear exactly when the sculpture will return, but sources suggest it will remain in storage at least until a sculpture of President Joe Biden, currently being created in Orlando, Florida, can be put on display as well. The funniest tweet I saw is keep it in a special place and let people pay to punch it. They could make a fortune. Take a photo of them punching it and make it even more. And it would probably be destroyed in a few days. Great way to take out our frustration on him. So I thought that was a pretty funny piece of news from the last 24. What wasn't, though, was the hearing that took place yesterday in the House. The House Democrats on Thursday held the first congressional hearing on anti-Asian discrimination in 3 decades in an effort to confront the spike in violence targeting the Asian community since the start of the pandemic. And it was the vice chairman or the ranking chairman or the minority chairman, whatever they call the Republican, because they're not in charge, Chip Roy. I mean, this hearing wouldn't have happened if the Republicans were in charge. They would have had hearings on white people having their feelings hurt and on snowflakes melting. But nonetheless, Chip Roy said something that was so outrageous at this hearing that it lit up social media and it lit up the rest of the people who were testifying as well. But I got to play it for you. Here is Congressman Chip Roy, who I was actually unfamiliar with until I watched this awful screed from him.
Our gathering here today, this is obviously an important subject matter. And to be clear, all Americans deserve protection and to live in a free and secure society. The fundamental nature of what we expect out of government, right? Secure the blessings of liberty, as we say in the Constitution of the United States. The victims of race-based violence and their families deserve justice. And as the case, what we're talking about here with the tragedy, what we just saw occur in Atlanta, Georgia. I would also suggest that the victims of cartels moving illegal aliens deserve justice. The American citizens in South Texas that are getting absolutely decimated by what's happening at our southern border deserve justice.
Wait, what's he talking about? Who's being decimated on the southern border? Americans are being decimated? I really don't know what Chip Roy is talking about there. Well, here's more.
The victims of rioting and looting in the streets last week, businesses closed, burned last summer, deserve justice. We believe in justice. Right? There's old sayings in Texas about, find all the rope in Texas and get a tall oak tree.
Wait, what?
Right? There's old sayings in Texas about, find all the rope in Texas and get a tall oak tree.
Oh no, that is not. Nope. When you're talking about how to end hatred towards racial minorities, that is clearly not a thing that you should say, especially if you're talking about Texas and a Texas congressman where they have a horrific history of lynching. Good God, Chip Roy. And no one that ever was hung from a tree received justice. That's not what he... Oh, boy, that's not. That's revenge. That's murder. That's terrorism, not justice, you disgusting monster. That set off a firestorm on social media. Adam Serwer of The Atlantic writes, Chip Roy represents Alamo Heights. I think that must be some affluent area, because then he says, you going to string up some cattle rustlers in front of Pottery Barn or Whole Foods there, cowboy? Asian American Congressman Ted Lieu responded to those comments by saying, Chip Roy glorified lynching at a hearing on violence against Asians. The largest mass lynching in U.S. history was against Chinese immigrants. And then he went on to say, I served on active duty in the U.S. military to defend Chip Roy's right to say stupid racist stuff, but I sure wish he would stop saying it. Here's Kurt Bardella on MSNBC's The Readout. He also is Asian American.
When someone reveals themselves to you, it's best to believe them, Joy. Chip Roy is a racist. He is a bigot. He is part of the problem that we are facing in this country with racism turned to violence against people of color, against Asian Americans. It is that type of attitude, that type of thinking, that type of rhetoric that has us in this situation in the first place. People like Chip Roy think that people like you and I aren't good enough, aren't equal to him because we're not white, that our lives matter less than his. And he sat there today in a dais during a committee hearing about violence and hate crimes against minorities and had the audacity to bring up something that you and I know all too well has overt racist connotations. He might as well have taken out a poster and said, hey, it's okay to lynch Asian Americans in this country.
And the great George Takei tweeted, one of the worst lynching incidents in our history was perpetrated against the Chinese community of Los Angeles when some 20 people were killed and hanged by an angry white mob. This language is unacceptable, and Chip Roy is an ignorant insider. Oh, my. And Congresswoman Grace Meng was none too happy with Chip Roy's comments. And I want to play you a little over 4 minutes of her testimony. She is an Asian American woman representing a district in Queens in New York City. And I'm going to play some longer clips on the show, and I'm going to tell you how long they are if you ever want to skip ahead. But I learned a lot from listening to Congresswoman Grace Meng, and coming up, actor Daniel Kim, who used his celebrity to testify, and it was real smart. I want to play that all for you as well. And these are longer clips, but I think they're worth it. I learned a lot, and the show is about learning and offering you context, especially in this opening segment. Well, of course, in all of the show. So here she is, Congresswoman Grace Meng, her entire, I think, just over 4 minutes, and it's worth it, especially the end.
Thank you, Chairman Nadler, Chairman Cohen, Ranking Member Thompson, and distinguished members of this committee for organizing today's hearing. The topic is discrimination and violence against Asian Americans. Some of us seem to be going a little off topic. I'm not sure why. For over a year, Asian Americans have been fighting an additional virus of hate and bigotry. Anti-Asian rhetoric like China virus, Kung flu, misinformation, racism have left Asian Americans traumatized and fearful for their lives. Mr. Roy mentioned the WHO, and it's the same World Health Organization that actually said not to use countries of origin when we're referring to diseases. Since last year, there have been over 3,800 reported incidents of anti-Asian hate. But we know that the majority of incidents go reported. And in fact, nearly 70% of reported anti-Asian hate incidents have happened to Asian American women. In fact, just this week, we saw the terrible news about the 6 Asian women who were shot and killed in the Atlanta area. Our community is bleeding. We are in pain, and for the last year, we've been screaming out for help. Asian American discrimination, however, is not new in this country. From the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act to the World War II incarceration of Japanese Americans, and from the 1975 police brutality in Manhattan's Chinatown to the 1982 murder of Vincent Chin, discrimination against Asian Americans is a shameful part of our history. Unfortunately, so much of this history is not taught in our schools. Excluding Asian Americans from our history books renders us invisible and deems us the perpetual foreigner. In fact, history has excluded the history of Asian Americans, Black Americans, Latino and Native Americans, and that has led to the systemic inequities at many institutions, including our academic institutions. In the 116th Congress, I introduced my resolution to condemn anti-Asian sentiment related to COVID, and I was grateful my resolution passed the House with bipartisan support, except for 164 of our Republican colleagues who voted against it, even though some had the audacity to tweet condolences after Atlanta's tragedy. I'm glad to hear about my colleague, Representative Steele's resolution, and I hope that she has better luck getting her party to support the resolution. During this last year, it became painfully apparent that we need a comprehensive effort from our local communities to the federal level. That's why I support bills like the No Hate Act, and that's why Senator Hirono and I introduced the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which would assign a point person at the Department of Justice to quickly review hate crimes and to make it easier for people to report these incidents. My bill also builds on President Biden's presidential memorandum by directing relevant federal agencies to work with community-based organizations to find ways to talk about the virus in a way that is not racist. I urge my colleagues on this committee for swift consideration of these bills. We cannot turn a blind eye to people living in fear. I want to go back to something that Mr. Roy said earlier. Your president and your party and your colleagues can talk about issues with any other country that you want, but you don't have to do it by putting a bullseye on the back of Asian Americans across this country, on our grandparents, on our kids. This hearing was to address the hurt and pain of our community and to find solutions, and we will not let you take our voice away from us. Thank you. I yield back.
Congressman Meng, thank you very much.
Powerful stuff. And so is this next clip. Also a little over, I think this one's over 5 minutes. This is the actor Daniel Kim. He also is Asian American. And I thought this was a powerful statement. Really smart, really articulate and thoughtful and thought provoking, powerful and passionate. And I have no problem when actors use their celebrity and they gain knowledge, and then they use the platform that they have through their celebrity to share that knowledge. I think that's exactly what it does. I thoroughly enjoyed this, learned a lot from it, and I think it's great. Here's Daniel Kim at the hearing as well.
Thank you, Chairman Cohen and Ranking Member Roy and the members of the Judiciary Committee. I'm both honored and dismayed to be back in front of you again. Some of you may remember that I was with you just this past September discussing the importance of diversity in American media. You may recall that the reason I was moved to speak then was because the House had just recently passed H.R. 908, condemning all forms of anti-hate Asian sentiment. But I was disheartened to find that for a bill that required no money or resources, just a simple condemnation of acts of hate against people of Asian descent, 164 members of Congress, all Republican, voted against it. And now here I am again, because as every witness in this hearing has pointed out, the situation has gotten worse, much worse. Vicha Ratanapakdee, murdered. Pak Ho, murdered. Noel Quintana, face slashed with a blade from ear to ear. An 89-year-old woman set on fire. Tadataka Ono, a professional jazz pianist, beaten so badly he can no longer play piano. And now 7 Asian people shot dead in Georgia 2 days ago, 6 of whom were women. These are only a few of the 3,800 reported incidents since last March. I was speaking to a pollster during the recent elections, and I asked him why, when I see polling results broken down by race, do I so rarely see Asian Americans as a separate category? He heard my question, he looked me dead in the eye, and he said, because Asian Americans are considered statistically insignificant. Statistically insignificant. Now, all of you listening to me here by virtue of your own elections are more familiar with the intricacies of polling than I am. So undoubtedly, you already know what this means. Statistically insignificant literally means we don't matter. We as Asian Americans have come to this country because we believe in the American dream. Many of us have succeeded, and some of us are even the frontline healthcare workers upon whom we've all come to depend during this terrible pandemic. But many of us are struggling too. In fact, the wealth disparity between the richest Asian Americans and the poorest is the largest of any ethnic group in America. In New York, Asian Americans have a higher poverty rate than any other minority group, where fully 1 in 4 are living below the poverty line. And poverty among Asian American seniors are much higher than the national average. That's something to consider as we watch the most vulnerable in our community get taunted, pushed, slashed, and murdered. Despite this wide disparity of experiences, we continue to be tagged the model minority. We simply cannot continue to live with the myth that the most successful of us represent the totality of us. So we know the hurdles we face. The question for us here is, what can we do about them? One of the places that starts is with education. Let's teach them everything that Professor Lee so eloquently highlighted for us, including celebrating the fact that the most decorated combat unit in U.S. military history was the 442nd Combat Team, a unit in World War II made up entirely of Asian Americans. Now, these are not moments in Asian American history. This is American history. When we are erased from our history books, we are made invisible. And the result, to quote Congresswoman Meng, is that we are perpetually made to feel like foreigners in our own country. Include our stories because they matter. We must also empower our local community organizers by directing funds to areas that have been historically impoverished, not just for the benefit of the AAPI community, but for the benefit of all communities living there, most of whom are non-white. It's no wonder that there's historically been tension among racial groups when the thing they have most in common is poverty and lack of access to services. And there happen to be two pieces of legislation before this committee as we speak that deal with these specific issues. One is the No Hate Bill. It provides necessary grants of money to community organizations, counseling for those convicted of hate crimes, and improved data collection for hate crime reporting, among other important services. The committee also has before it right now the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act introduced by Congresswoman Meng and Senator Hirono. It's crucial that we have reliable reporting for these hate crimes and an infrastructure that makes it easy for people for whom English is not their primary language. Chairman Nadler, you have been an ally to the AAPI community in the past. I respectfully urge you not to let these bills languish in committee, but see them through so that they can be passed by the full House and then on to the Senate. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that I'm going to convince all of you to stand up for us. Trust me, I've seen your voting records. But I am speaking to those to whom humanity still matters. In closing, let me just say that there are several moments in a country's history that chart its course indelibly for the future. For Asian Americans, that moment is now. What happens right now and over the course of the coming months will send a message for generations to come as to whether we matter. Whether the country we call home chooses to erase us or include us, dismiss us or respect us, invisibilize us or see us. Because you may consider us statistically insignificant now, but one more fact that has no alternative is that we are the fastest growing racial demographic in the country. We are 23 million strong. We are united and we are waking up. Thank you.
Whew. Thank you, sir.
Daniel Kim. Well done, sir. Very well done. Okay, also on the last 24, last night on the Tonight Show on CBS with Stephen Colbert, Stephen asked his guest, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, about Mitch McConnell's threats to gum up everything he possibly can so that nothing works in the Senate. Here's that exchange from CBS last night.
Mitch McConnell said on the floor of the Senate that if y'all change the filibuster, there will be scorched earth of the kind that no one presently sitting in the Senate has ever seen. What could possibly be more scorched earth than the way Mitch McConnell has just run roughshod for the past 4 to 8 years, really? I mean, isn't he threatening that if you do this, Mitch McConnell will continue to be Mitch McConnell?
Yeah, we used to call the Senate, when he was in charge, the legislative graveyard. The House would send over good bills that had a lot of popular support. He might oppose them, fair enough, but he wouldn't even put them on the floor for a vote. Mitch McConnell is so afraid of the American Rescue Plan that he keeps looking for diversions, one after the other. And this is one of them. We're not going to be diverted. We're not going to be deterred. We are going to go forward because we know the American people demand, need, want bold change. And we're going to do it. And Mitch McConnell can do all the threatening and bluster he wants. It's not going to stop us.
Is it empty? Could he grind things to a halt as a minority leader?
Look, I'm not even going to give this blustery threat credence. We're going to go forward, period.
All right. Well, that didn't sound like exactly an answer, and we'll see what happens with that, but I wanted to share that with you. And then finally, you got to hear the whole exchange between Senator Rand Paul. It's just absolutely insufferable arrogance, ignorance, and constant embarrassment. I mean, every time he tries to talk tough and challenge one of these experts, he looks like such an unbelievable failure and complete douche nozzle. Here he is, a stupid bag of hammers, Rand Paul talking to an American hero, and I absolutely mean that. The gay community sees him that way because of his fight in the AIDS epidemic. So many African nations see him that way because of his fight against the epidemics that they have suffered from Ebola and on. And of course, he's done heroic work here on COVID-19 over the past year. Here is Rand Paul questioning Dr. Anthony Fauci and getting absolutely Fauci'd.
No scientific studies have shown significant numbers of reinfections of patients previously infected or previously vaccinated. What specific studies do you cite to argue that the public should be wearing masks well into 2022?
I'm not sure I understand the connection of what you're saying about masks and reinfection. We're talking about people who have never been infected before.
You're telling everybody to wear a mask, whether they've had an infection or a vaccine. What I'm saying is they have immunity, and everybody agrees they have immunity. What studies do you have that people that have had the vaccine or have had the infection are spreading the infection? If we're not spreading the infection, isn't it just theater?
No, it's not.
The vaccine and you're wearing 2 masks. Isn't that theater?
No, that's not. Here we go again with the theater. Let's get down to the facts. Okay, the studies that you quote from Crotty and Sete look at in vitro examination of memory immunity, which in their paper they specifically say this does not necessarily pertain to the actual protection. It's in vitro.
And what study can you point to that shows significant reinfection? There are no studies that show
let me finish the response to your question, if you please. The other thing is that when you talk about reinfection and you don't keep in the concept of variants, that's an entirely different ballgame. That's a good reason for a mask. In the South African study conducted by J&J, they found that people who were infected with wild type and were exposed to the variant in South Africa, the 351, it was as if they had never been infected before. They had no protection. So when you talk about reinfection, you've got to make sure you're talking about wild type. I agree with you that you very likely would have protection from wild type for at least 6 months if you're infected. But we in our country now have variants that are circulating.
Significant reinfection. What study shows significant reinfection, hospitalization, and death after either natural infection or the vaccine? It doesn't exist. There is no evidence that there are significant reinfections after vaccine. In fact, I don't think we have a hospitalization in the United States after the 2-week period after the second vaccination. We don't have a death in the United States.
You're not hearing what I'm saying about variants. We're talking about wild type versus variants.
And what proof is there that there are significant reinfections with hospitalizations and death from the variants? None in our country. Zero.
Well, because we don't have a prevalent of a variant yet. We're having one. Can I finish? We're having 117 that's becoming more dominant.
Policy based on conjecture.
No, it isn't based on conjecture.
Variants, so you want people to wear a mask for another couple years.
No,
you've been vaccinated and you parade around in 2 masks for show.
No,
you can't get it again. There's virtually 0% chance you're going to get it. And yet you're telling people that have had the vaccine, who have immunity. You're defying everything we know about immunity by telling people to wear a mask who've been vaccinated. No. Instead, you should be saying there is no science to say we're going to have a problem from the large number of people being vaccinated. You want to get rid of vaccine hesitancy? Tell them they can quit wearing their mask after they get the vaccine. Okay. You want people to get the vaccine? Give them a reward instead of telling them that the nanny state's going to be there for 3 more years and you got to wear a mask forever. People don't want to hear it. There's no science behind it.
Well, let me just state for the record that masks are not theater. Masks are protective. And we
have immunity there, theater. If you already have immunity, you're wearing a mask to give comfort to others. You're not wearing a mask because of any science.
I totally disagree with you.
Dr. Fauci, if you could respond so that we could understand the difference between the virus itself and the variants and the reason for a mask?
I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't.
If you could respond to the question so that we could all understand the difference between the vaccine in controlling the wild type versus the variants that are out there and the reason for wearing a mask, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, yes. First of all, when you have a variant, you have an immunity that you get with convalescent sera and the same sort of thing. If I vaccinate you or me against the wild type, you get a certain level of antibody that's specific for a particular viral strain. If there's a circulating variant, you don't necessarily have it. You have some spillover immunity to be sure, but you diminish by anywhere from 2 to 8-fold the protection. So the point I'm saying is that there are variants in now circulating. The point that Senator Paul was making was that if you look at wild type only, there is some clear-cut credence to what he's saying. But we are living right now in a situation where we're having a dominance of 117, which was the original UK. We have a very troublesome variant in New York City, a 526. We've got 2 variants in California, a 427, 429, and we have a number of others. So we're not dealing with a static situation of the same virus. That was the only point I'm making.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I'm not exactly sure what Dr. Anthony Fauci just said, but I will always trust and believe him over Dr. Rand Paul, who really just is insufferable. What an unbelievably arrogant prick. All right, those are 2 long audio clips, and it's brought us to like almost 37 minutes already into the podcast. I'm way late, and I got 2 great conversations come up, so if you're listening to the whole thing, I hope you got time today, but I'm glad to have you along for the ride. Many of you love when the podcast is much longer, but some of you, I think, feel guilty if you're missing out. Don't. Find what you like. Listen to what you like. I am so happy to have you here. And now it's time for the news dump. And let me see here. I think we have another news dump jingle, new news dump jingle. This is a collaboration now between 2 listeners. Apparently, Dan McDonald wrote it and Pete Coe recorded it all. Here we go.
Snarling baboon at the zoo, red and swollen rump. If he eats my face, it's today's news dump.
Sweet Christ. Wow. Okay, boys. Well done. I played that last night for folks that were at the hangout, and we all had a pretty good laugh. So I guess I'm not the only one that finds those hilarious and entertaining. Thank you, boys. It's a news dump. Rapid fire headlines, not politics, not COVID, undercovered and important. Here we go. Well, ready or not, folks, it is showtime. Get ready to pay for overpriced popcorn and candy. AMC Theaters announced it's going to have 98% of its U.S. movie theaters open on Fridays. Bunch of theaters reopened in California. Even more theaters are expected to open by March 26th. I guess I'm excited to see the Top Gun sequel. I think that comes out this summer. Other than that, I don't even really go to the theater, but I guess that's good news, right? U.S. jobless claims rise to 770,000, with layoffs still very high. The number of Americans seeking unemployment benefits rose last week to 770,000, sign that layoffs remain high even as much as the U.S. economy is steadily recovering from the coronavirus recession. Police are saying a bicyclist who tried to beat a drawbridge in Miami slid to his death down the rising concrete slab. So don't do that. The guy was 58 years old on his morning bike ride, and he tried to make it past the drawbridge over the Miami River. Apparently, he didn't make it. That's pretty bad, and I don't know why I shared that story with you, but just don't try to. A couple bad cycling stories over the past week, but be careful, folks. Speaking of baboons eating people's faces, how about this? An employee at Ohio's Columbus Zoo and Aquarium has been released from the hospital after being attacked by a cheetah on Thursday. Pete Coe, I think that's the kind of story that you like in the news dump. The incident took place just before 10 a.m. while 2 employees were walking the 4-year-old cheetah for her daily exercise. Why are they walking the cheetah? For one, the cheetah's name is Isabel. It was harnessed per normal protocol. Apparently, as the zookeeper began walking toward the cheetah and 2 employees. The cheetah was calm and purring, and Then all of a sudden the cheetah crouched down and lunged. Still no word on why the cheetah attacked the zookeeper, but my guess is because it's a cheetah. That's why. Yep. I don't know much, but I think that's probably why the cheetah attacked it, because it's a goddamn cheetah. So maybe don't lock it up and put a fucking harness on it. A new report commissioned by Germany's Cologne Archdiocese on church officials' handling of past cases of sexual abuse has found 75 cases in which high-ranking officials neglected their duties. Yet another new report, this one coming from the German Archbishop, who's now offered to resign after the abuse criticism. And good. Oh, horrible. I just rewatched that movie Spotlight a few months ago, and so important and so tragic and ongoing. Here's a pretty unique and horrifying story. Kobe Bryant's widow, Vanessa Bryant, has posted the names of 4 Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies who are awful people. She alleges, if this is true, that they shared graphic photos from the site of the 2020 helicopter crash that killed her husband and her daughter. What kind of person would do such a thing? I mean, it's absolutely horrific. None of the deputies were directly involved in the investigation of the crash or had any legitimate purpose in taking or passing around these photos. Wow. I'm sure it's just a couple of bad apples. And finally, the NFL is going to nearly double its media revenue to more than $10 billion a season, with new rights agreements announced Thursday, including a deal with Amazon Prime Video gives the streaming service exclusive rights to Thursday Night Football beginning in 2022. Thought the NFL was declining. Football was on its way out. Not the case. Amazon now getting into the mix. All right, that is your news dump for Friday, the 19th of March, folks. All right, let's get to my guest interviews coming up. Human rights attorney and all-around great and brilliant guy. And my great conversation, so good, with Qasim Rashid, who ran for Congress in Virginia last cycle. He didn't win, but he ran a really great race, and we had an awesome conversation. That's coming up. And now, though, it's Finnegan Fridays, everybody. Cultural commentator and comedian, very highly respected comic, who has been on the Chappelle Show and VH1's Best Week Ever. He was on the TV series with Ice Cube, Are We There Yet? He's been a writer on several shows as well, and I just love talking to Christian Finnegan on Twitter, @ChristFinnegan. Go follow him there. Here we go. It's time for Finnegan Fridays. Lots to talk about, as always, with Christian Finnegan, and I want to get to the one horrible massacre that seemed to dominate the news at the end of the week. But before we do, what else was there this week, Christian? I mean, there was a bunch of laws in Washington that were passed that seemed not controversial, but got no Republican, didn't get that many Republican votes. And there were certainly plenty of other things, but it seems like this story is really dominating the news, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I know that that the president and the vice president really want to make this time really doing a bit of a victory lap, which they should do. And it's not just a victory lap. It's about explaining to people what's in these things and all the benefits that they can get from the rescue plan. And so that when so that people know that they can access these funds and apply for these grants and et cetera and so forth. So it doesn't just get all sopped up by, corporations and what, or connected people and whatnot. But, the Georgia spa massacre is kind of taken precedence, which it should.
Good.
I just basically summed up what anybody who's been watching the news knows.
No, it's you make a really good point about the idea that we're in the first week since these checks started going out, and you want to let people know how to take advantage of all the different resources, and that is what the president and vice president are doing. But they also had to both comment yesterday, because I played both of them on the podcast yesterday, on the massacre that happened. Not to mention a story that got undercovered because of the massacre, that there was a dude outside the vice president Kamala Harris's home, the Naval Observatory, with guns and ammo who got caught. And I think that would have been a much bigger story had there not been a horrible massacre in Atlanta.
Yeah, and I mean, I haven't done a huge amount of digging, but I feel like there's still a lot we don't even know about that situation. Like when they say that he was on the Naval Observatory grounds, like what does that mean? Does that mean that he showed up outside of the front gate and was stopped? Like, or does that mean that he somehow snuck on to, like, I private area. I don't know. Do you know?
I don't know. I think his car. I think they found him in his car. Or they found his car with the weapons in it or something. I don't know.
Yeah. It's. I mean, that's obviously a very terrifying situation for different reasons. But I feel a little guilty when it comes to the spa massacre, because I think at first it kind of didn't strike me the gravity of the situation, that this belongs in a category with like the Tree of Life synagogue massacre and the El
Paso shooting.
I'm sorry?
The El Paso shooting where all the Hispanic people were targeted.
The El Paso shooting, the South Carolina church, this is in that field. And I didn't realize that at first. I think I kind of thought it was just one of those horrible, like you see it in the paper, like, oh my God, there was a shooting. The sort of cultural moment of it didn't weigh on me as much as it should have, which I ascribe slightly to my own kind of latent racism is such a broad word, but not, that I don't maybe take certain communities as seriously as perhaps I should.
Well, I think that's a really honest admission. And as you were saying it, as often, I found myself agreeing and not realizing it until you crystallized it the way you did so honestly. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But, it's also, there's also this question about it can be many things at once. And that's true of a lot of things that we discuss in life, including in our marriages. A lot of things can be true at once. We hear this word intersectionality a lot. And so the Asian community is reeling, obviously, because there's been a spate of hate crimes against them. We could talk about why. But not that I want to put more emphasis on anything than other. But one of the other things that often has happened in this country is young men targeting specifically women because they're not able to have sex. They're called incels, or in this case, he says apparently he had a sex addiction. Who knows what to believe at this point? But almost more than anything, it also seemed, not more than anything, but I think it's important to talk about the misogyny and the hatred of women, and of course the access to guns. I mean, we talk about domestic abuse and violence all the time, but or maybe not enough. So.
Yeah, I mean, obviously everyone's talking about that the press conference that was given by the Georgia sheriff's spokesman. I don't think it was the sheriff. He was the spokesperson for the department, as far as I'm concerned. And it was, he was slammed, rightly so, by speaking a lot to the terrible day this guy was having, and seemed to be taking awkward pains to dismiss the idea that it was racism, and seemed to be was very credulous in terms of what the killer had told him, as if like that should be taken at face value. Like I think at one point he said, well, we know that's true because he told us. What? Like we're just taking a killer's word on what his motivations were. First of all, as if the killer even knows. I don't know half the things I do, why I do them over the course of a day. I don't think we can trust a guy who just shot 8 people, killed 6 of them, I believe, or I believe killed 8 and 6 of them were Asian. I'm sorry. It's fine. Exactly. But I don't think that we can take this dude at face value. Right. And it seemed very awkward that this dude was basically saying, it's just sexism. Don't worry. It's not racism. He just hates women. He's just addicted to sex. It has nothing to do with Asian racism. And then I don't know if you saw that later that day, that particular dude had posted this T-shirt that was for sale, I guess, in his department. That was like an anti-COVID anti-Chinese gag T-shirt, where it's meant to look like a Corona bottle, I guess. And it was like only available in China, CHY-NA. And not only was he like, did he put it on his Facebook page, he was selling it essentially like, hey guys, get them while they're,
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. COVID-19 imported virus from CHY-NA. And just to be clear with what you're saying, somebody figured this out, that in the past he had shared this. He didn't share it as a result or in connection with the Harlem Massacre, but in the past,
long ago.
But the point being, I mean, just for a moment, who would ever wear, sell, laugh at, or look at it like a T-shirt with the words, how do we as comedians make COVID-19 funny on a T-shirt? You don't.
No.
It's generally something you should avoid.
The goal isn't to make people laugh in terms of like, oh, what a funny play on words. It is to underline a mindset and to reassure people that they are correct in their hostilities. Do you know what I mean? That it's like, are you angry at China? Because I am, and we can bond on that. Fuck China, right? Fuck the Chinese, fuck Asians in general. Like, I mean, I'm extrapolating, but that I think is what happens. And you just start to think of certain groups of people as deserving whatever they get.
There is a thirst for information after something like this happens from all of us. It's natural curiosity. Why would anybody do such a thing? But what law enforcement representatives generally do in these cases are, we're not going to ascribe any motivations to the crime. I think that's the best, even if the guy had a manifesto, because you don't want to taint a jury pool. I heard this analysis from my friend Katie Fang, and this guy last night on MSNBC, to be clear, these aren't my ideas. But this guy, this cop came out and said the things that he said. And it's like, you're supposed to say.
What are you doing? Yeah, you're polluting the entire evidence pool. And also, what are we doing just even trying to surmise this guy's motivations just off the top of your head? This is not an ad lib situation. And somebody had brought that up on Twitter and to me, and it made me kind of think, I promise you, if this killer was Middle Eastern or black or Latino, basically anything but a white guy, what we would have gotten is, who can tell what motivates a mind like this? Who knows what goes through the minds of these people? Because they're crazy. They're other. Whereas this guy, he's not other. He's us. And so therefore we have to find, well, he's having a bad day and he was sex addicted. And yes, not saying that he shouldn't be punished, but let's take things into context and understand that, almost like a there, but for the grace of God go I sort of attitude. Whereas we don't extend that to any other group of people.
Should I reach out to my Asian American friends, my Korean American friends today?
Yes, Peter. No, I mean, that is certainly what I have heard experts say just over the course of the past 48 hours, listening to the news and whatnot. But I kind of wonder, I wish there was something.
It's just weird. I haven't reached out to you in a year. Hi, hope you're okay.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Just thinking of you, and I was thinking through my friends, and I was looking at my phone, and
I know we worked at the same company 8 years ago, and we were on a fantasy basketball team for 6 months, but are you okay? I'm here for you. It is a little potentially awkward.
My dad died of COVID 2 months ago. Where were you? I posted it on Facebook. Now you're just reaching out to me because I fit a category
of paralyzed from the waist down.
Too soon. Did you hear about that, Sean Bradley? Oof.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Oh my God, no!
It's probably why I made that mental connection.
Made me think of it because that dude was riding a bike. I'm like, all right, no more bikes then. That's the worst.
I know. You can't live like that, Pete.
Exactly. So the other question I want to ask you. Go ahead. Go ahead. What were we going to say?
Well, no, just we were talking before we hit record
during the pre-interview. Yes. You were talking about.
We were chatting about this. This isn't just for the microphone, folks. This is just what Pete and I talk about. We're very newsworthy people. I'm taking the piss out of this.
We talked for hours about it before we do it. No, the idea that you were. Is this what you're getting at? The way that we look at Asian Americans, Asians in America.
I feel like there's two.
This is important. I like this. Yeah.
I feel like there's two rather distinct groups of Asian Americans, and we spend a lot of our time, or whatever time we spend paying attention to Asian Americans, we focus on this one group and not the other. And you could say we don't focus on either group enough, but there's the group of Asian Americans. There is the Korean kid who you grew up with. There's maybe 3 or 4 Asian kids. I grew up in suburban Massachusetts. There's a very thriving Asian community there now. But when I was growing up, there were maybe 8 to 10 Asian kids in my entire school.
Where I grew up in Marcellus, New York, they're about the same, and they were almost all Korean. They were almost all adopted. One family adopted 9 kids from Korea, and one of them was one of my closest friends who recently passed away, unfortunately. But go ahead, yeah, the same. But that group of adopted.
These are the people who are that kind of exist in quote unquote our world. They work in the same offices we work in. They go to the same bars. They're in our groups of friends, and those people definitely are at risk and they're vulnerable. You know, they're vulnerable to slurs on the street. They're vulnerable to random acts of violence. They're vulnerable to, you know, stereotyping, you know, in terms of masculinity or sexuality. You know, they're subject to a lot of the crap that is definitely anti-Asian racism. But then there's this other group of Asians in America that we just flat out ignore, especially when you live in an urban center like New York or, you know, like Atlanta or a place like that. You know, these group of people, the people who work at the nail salons, the people who work at the open markets, yep. you know, the people who, you know, work in, you know, that sort of, I hate to use the term, but I don't know what else to say, but like the quote unquote underclass, you know, of in these Asian communities. And they're so, and I can only speak for myself, but they're so foreign to me in terms of not just literally foreign, but in terms of their culture, their lifestyle, the things that they rally around culturally. The only other community that makes me feel as separate, I would say, is maybe the Hasidic community, where it's like, it feels impenetrable to me almost.
Yeah.
And I feel like we ignore that group of people because we can't relate to them directly, and because they stick to their own and they don't get in our way, and so it's kind of just like they do their own thing, but a lot of these people, you know, a lot of them are very close to slaves. You know, a lot of them, I don't want to talk out my ass here because I'm sure there's experts who could set me correct about a lot of these things, but a lot of these people, they're living in squalor, they're very poor, and they just go unseen by us on a regular basis. And I feel like those are the people who, in my mind, are the most at risk right now, because you look at this guy, and was it misogyny? Of course it was. Was it racism? Of course it was. But it was also classism. It was also this idea that these people just don't matter as much. And they're kind of just, you can kind of wipe them out because they're not connected to you culturally.
Right.
And they're not American what really either. Concerns me moving forward.
They're not American, even though they live here and they work here and they go to school here and they worship here. And maybe they technically aren't American.
Their kids will be potentially,
right?
But they're not.
But we don't look at them as
actual immigrants, or maybe first generation. You know, it takes, I've always thought it takes 2 generations to make an American. It takes being born to someone living in America. And when I say be an American, I mean to be taken seriously, to be accepted as an American. You're an American if you're an American. In my opinion, you're an American if you live in America, whether you're documented or not.
Yeah, after a certain amount of time, for sure.
We all contribute to this culture one way or another, financially, culturally, whatever. But I feel like to be taken seriously or to be appreciated as an American, it takes 2 generations. But those, particularly among Asian immigrants, because it's a completely different, character system. It's not like Latinos where we share a commonality. There's a common, cultural, even any Latino culture is going to have something in common with you if you're a white person in America, much more so than, a Taiwanese.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. Plus, there's just a lot more overlapping, I think, and exposure to each other. That's at least been my experience than there are, generally speaking, Asian Americans. So, but
so I wish there was something a little more tactile that we can do, and perhaps there is. But
I think you saying it out loud,
try to forge some bonds with those people.
Yep, but just you saying it out loud and recognizing, I think, as you said before we hit record on it, it really gave me a kind of a good way to think about it, because I think about that, but I've never really voiced it, and I haven't heard it voiced. I haven't seen that documentary or read that book, so I think it's the way that you just put a lot of nuance to it is really important. But the other issue here is and I want to specifically talk with you about this, language. And why language matters, because as comedians, we have, I think, a pretty good insights on this. And you hear a lot about the stupidity about cancel culture, which you and I have talked about, that idea, that phrase a lot. But political correctness, I think, is what it used to be called. And why is it bad for the president or anybody else to call the virus COVID-19 the Chinese flu? And it's not like it's so offensive that I'm so offended that you would say that. It activates people. It puts a target on people, and it gives those who are the most dangerous an imperative, an incentive, a reason. And in America, they have access to guns. So that's why language matters.
It matters more now than it did a long time ago because of the speed of communication, because of the reach of communication, because of the existence of things like automobiles and transportation systems, that communities, if they are motivated to attack other communities, it is easier to do that now. People talk like, oh, well, we called the Spanish flu. It's like, yeah, how many Spaniards were you encountering on a day-to-day basis back in 1918? Like how, if you had come up, first of all, the Spanish flu was not even Spanish. It was American. But
yeah, I just learned that. It came from Kansas.
Yeah. But even if it was, I'm not saying that it was justified. It probably shouldn't have been called the Spanish flu then. There was the consequences were not as immediate and direct back then because the groups just weren't able to interact in the way that they are now. Whereas if you have a gripe against Asian people, you can act on it very quickly right now. I mean, you can get online, even in terms of just, online bullying and stuff and so I feel like people have to understand that our culture has changed and our rules have to change. The things that govern our behavior have to change. And I wish people weren't so willfully obtuse about this.
Yes, and that means that you need people to talk about it, I think, the way that we are, but more, more influential leaders need to talk about it as well. When you have, it's just so crazy to think about someone, with a huge following or the most powerful man in the world, in Donald Trump's case, using that kind of language and the obvious damage that it does and who it brings out and what it brings out and gives people an excuse. And the idea that this dumb sheriff came out and said these ignorant things, like who are these people? How do they get to leadership and then be so irresponsible with their language, much less their actions?
It's tragic, and it's laying bare. It's very easy to think of like racism, and I think we've talked about this in the past. That we think of racism as like a burning cross. And if I'm not burning a cross in somebody's yard, then I'm not racist. Right. And it's very easy to kind of silo racism like that. Or it's very comforting to do that. When you start to acknowledge it as just this pervasive, lead in the water that kind of infects all of us in ways that maybe we haven't even fully grasped, it's a little disconcerting to think like, do I have to change everything? Do I have to, how wrong am I? And how much do I need to change? Like, I got a job to go to. I've got my kids have to go to soccer practice, and you're telling me I have to fucking change my entire way of being? Fuck you. I think that is a lot of the resistance to it. But I think if you look at it, it's really one problem. It's just looking at the way your actions contribute or don't contribute. Am I helping or am I hurting?
Yep.
And I don't think you really have to get more complicated than that. It's just, am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem?
I like that. That's a binary I can deal with, and it's true.
Yeah, I don't believe in binaries generally speaking, but in terms of just kind of a compass for your life, I think that am I pushing in the right direction or am I pushing in the wrong direction?
I don't know. Did I tell you about this a couple of days ago? I almost got in a fight with a guy in a deli about over a mask.
You did, yes.
So mentioned that. So I've already mentioned it and talked about it, but there's one thing I've hung up on and thought a lot about all week since it happened, and it's the guy yelling at us after this woman, asked him to put his mask on, and I wasn't paying any attention, and then he says, "Mind your own business," And I chimed in, and he says, I'm sick of people telling me what to do. I've been hanging on that phrase all week, Christian.
Yeah.
What does he mean?
Well, first of all, that is America. That is basically the unspoken slogan of America is, you're not the boss of me. You can't tell me what to do. Yeah, I mean, that is the founding principle of America, is that fuck you, we'll run our own country, and I'm not, nobody's the boss of me. That's the whole
rugged
pioneer mindset, and so I think it is kind of inextricable from American mythology. But what is so ridiculous is that you follow rules 100 times a day in 100 different ways. If I veer into traffic, if I veer into the left lane as I am, it can be like,
hey, watch where you're going.
What to do.
Watch where you're going. Don't tell me what to do. No, just watch. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have told you what to do, but you're in my fucking lane.
Yeah.
And
I don't know why they can't understand that this is just a version of that same baseline consideration that allows us not to all murder each other every day. I
think it's because it's been used as a wedge issue. Like, I think that we could have maybe been somewhat on board with it if somebody, with a influential voice didn't start using it as a way to get ratings and get votes. Trump used it, and everybody in the right made it this masculine thing, but it's only because it worked.
I knew it was going to happen.
Why?
None of it has surprised me. I mean, you have to, when you were talking about Trump using the China virus, quote unquote, or the Kung flu or whatever, it's his entire appeal, or not his entire appeal, but a large part of Trump's appeal is the appeal of the kid in the 4th grade who says fart to the teacher, or says, shit. And everybody goes, ooh, that's the excitement he elicits in his base, is that like, oh, he said it, like, oh, I gotta get, and like he's giving it to the man, and that's obviously the absurdity of being a conservative in 21st century America, is being in charge but pretending that you're the victim. We're more powerful than you, but stop telling me, we're going to tell off the authority, even though we are the authority. They somehow feel more ruled. The typical conservative feels like George Clooney has more power over his life than the United States president. They are, certainly when Trump was president, they somehow feel that they're oppressed by Hollywood or some blogger, but the people who actually have all of the money and power are somehow, not in charge of them in their minds.
Yeah. And they're the ones giving them that power by constantly talking about them. Like, who was it? Jimmy Kimmel. Was it the Grammys this past week? Was that what it was? And Cardi B and Wet Ass Pussy and all that.
Yeah.
And they were outraged by that. And Jimmy Kimmel just minimized it. Like, he's like, they're just mad at like a black woman doing a dirty song or something. Like, what are you why are we talking about that? Don't give your power away to her if you're so upset by it. Like, stop talking about it. It's not a problem for you.
Well, they've never been able to compete on the cultural playing field. I mean, because generally speaking, they're not creative people.
By the way, my daughter's running around.
Generally, I'm not talking literally. I mean, there are a lot of conservatives who are great artists, not generally.
My daughter's introduced me to that song by singing it out loud to me. And
what,
yes, and it shocked me to my core that this was a song and that my daughters were singing it. And then, you know what happened? We talked about it for a while, had a great conversation.
And also, like, you know what? Tale as old as fucking time. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's just like, it's just an extension of, I remember when I was in college, there was that song, Don't Want No Short Dick Man. I don't know if it was Don't Want No Short Dick Man.
Yep.
There's My Neck, My Back, My Pussy, and My Crack, a classic. Do you know that song?
No, but keep going. You know all about music, and they all sound fantastic.
Yes, I mean there is
that
always.
Dylan?
Yes, I believe that was Janice Ian, I believe, did My Neck, My Back, My Pussy, My Crack.
That's great. It's empowerment in a way.
I mean, it's just like, yes.
That's what I learned.
Is wet ass pussy did it jar me the first time I heard it? Yes, but that's what it's supposed to do. Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be songs like that. Always.
America is going to hell because of songs like that, is what I heard from Hannity this week. And so
I just think, like, on a list of things that you could be concerned about right now, it's just like, God bless you for having a life so easy that you can afford to be upset about this right now.
All right. Do you had a great, I'll let you go, but you had this great thread about your brother who passed away, and that he was one of the original LARPers. And you also found out that he was pretty into ElfQuest, which was a huge part of my childhood. But you're
the first person I've talked to. I mean, not that I know people who loved ElfQuest, but I mean, I know people do love ElfQuest, but you're the first person in my just day-to-day life that I've met that actually has
Alfred
read that.
and Chris used to berate me, and it was hilarious. It really was funny because they were hilarious when they would do it, but I did always want to defend it to them, but I knew it wasn't smart to defend it to them because they were going to get the best of me, because it's hilarious.
It is hilarious. Inherently. It is hilarious. And if you look at it, it's like you think you know what it is. If I were to see it, not having read it, I know the jokes I'd make about it.
I
still make about it. But in terms of world building, it's really impressive. I mean, that is what I like about fantasy and sci-fi in general, is that generally the world building is really fascinating, in the characters and dialogue, not so much. But it's like a really intricate story, and I think it's a very creative story. And again, I have in that thread, I was talking about how I used to sneak into my brother's room because he was a comic book geek, and I fashioned myself as not being like that. But when he would leave, I would go into his bedroom and I'd read his comic books, and I would read all the Marvel comics, Secret Wars and the Wolverine limited series and like all those things. And then ElfQuest, I read. I was obsessed with ElfQuest kind of quietly and privately. And then about 5 years ago, I just completely blocked it out of my memory. And I was walking around a bookstore just trying to find a book. I think I was doing The Artist's Way at the time. And I was on an artist's date at a bookstore. For people who know what that is, and if you haven't shut off your computer yet. And I just remembered, like, what was that elf thing that I used to read? And so I found the giant compilation of ElfQuest comics, and reading it, I've read it probably 5 times. It's a trip, and it really sends me down a nostalgic road. And I was surprised at how smart a lot of it still seemed to me.
Well, I'm glad to hear you give it some credibility. It feels very vindicating for me. To have that be on the record. But what about just, before we go, about your brother and LARPing and all of that world that he was so into? I was really interested to see you talk, obviously, just about your brother that way and hear more about him, because I like and admire you so much. It's interesting to hear that. But what did he start? What was he a pioneer in this world?
Yeah, he kind of was. He was sort of like the Mick Jagger of the LARPing world. LARPing, for people who don't know, is live action role playing. If you've ever seen the movie Role Models, although that's a little cartoony what they had in that movie because it's a comedy, but where people, like a group of people, will rent out like a Boy Scout camp for a weekend, and for the entire weekend there'll be a dungeon, kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons dungeon, where there'll be a plot, and they'll have characters and activities that have to get accomplished, and it's not just swords, although there's a lot of that, but there's a bard at the local tavern, and there's king and a queen, and there's subplots, and that's what my older brother was involved in, and that's where he met his wife, and it was heavily involved in this community at the time called the New England Role Playing Organization, which they called NERO, even though I always said it should be called NERPO. If you really sound it out, if you're not gonna, I just think NERPO was a way of making fun of him. I'd be like, "Are you going to NERPO this weekend?" It's called NERO. And then that was in New England, obviously, but then my brother had moved to the tri-state area, and so a few of them started something called the Alliance LARP. Which then grew into being, if I'm not mistaken, one of the bigger LARPing communities in the country. And John would write a lot of the plots, and was kind of not the guy in charge, but it's almost like the chief of staff, essentially, from what I gather, and was like a really beloved figure, and a lot of times, we didn't always get along so well, and there were many things about him and his group of friends and his culture that I just didn't get into. Like, I've always had a problem with quote unquote nerds, if it makes sense, because sometimes I find not all of them, but a lot of them to be lacking in emotional intelligence. There's this idea that every nerd is secretly like a poet with a heart of gold. It's not been my experience. A lot of the people that used to come play, because my brother would have them all play Dungeons and Dragons once a week at our house when I'm growing up. And in my experience, a lot of them were mean, and a lot of them were not funny, but made jokes all the time.
And actually wanted to be a dungeon master.
I'm sorry?
And actually wanted to be a dungeon master. That's how
quite
mean they were.
Quite clearly.
Yeah.
And, and again, it's hard to not lapse into cliches, but sometimes the hygiene was not fully up to snuff. But as a result, like, my brother and I didn't totally bond about a lot of the stuff, even though he was a real sweet, kind of a gentle giant type dude. And it was not a cool thing at the time. I mean, there was a community that I was not aware of. I remember one year for Christmas, he pulled a total douchebag move of not getting me a present and gave me a coupon to come to a free weekend at Nero. Like, he's like, I'll get you in, because he didn't want to buy a fucking present, which is such a lame ass brother thing to do. And at the time, we had a stepbrother who was my best friend, and our parents got married. It's a long story, but we went to Nero. We went like, all right, let's go check this out. And we kind of were half going to make fun of it, kind of had that detached irony thing going. And we showed up, and I didn't realize like what a big deal it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like 30 people in a courtyard or something like that. It was, a couple hundred people, and it was pretty ornate. And I remember walking around, and everybody was in full capes with, they had PVC with foam on top of it where their swords, and, and they had armor and all this crap. And I said to somebody, excuse me, do you guys know where I can find John Finnegan? And he said, you mean Finther? And I died a little bit, like a little part of me kind of withered.
You know about your brother's nickname?
Yeah. I was like, no, Finther.
Do you know about your new nickname?
Finther? Yep. Am I now Finther? Am I Little Finther?
That's who you are now.
I was Little Finnegan growing up, so now I'm Little Finther. But I will say, but at his wedding, because they had met in that community, most of the guests were, there were a number of capes at my wedding, men wearing capes.
At his wedding or your wedding?
At his wedding.
Oh,
you
said my wedding just now.
I'm sorry. At his wedding, there were a number of men with sort of lace up garments and billowy sleeves and whatnot.
Awesome.
But they were in love with him. I didn't know, I didn't know. And he was a leader. In his wake. I mean, God damn, he had a couple hundred people there. I mean, I don't know. I'm bad with numbers, and it was obviously I was in a different head, but I was just agog at how many people there were and how many people there were to get up and say wonderful things about him. And I didn't know at the time that culture was going to take over America. And it clearly has, and so although I don't feel wistful about my brother, particularly, like, he's been dead for 13 years. He died in 2008. But I do feel bummed for him that he wasn't around to see his passions take over, for the Marvel comic universe, for Game of Thrones, which I became utterly obsessed with.
Oh, yeah.
And would have been totally a common ground for us to have related to, because we never really had that thing. Right. Like some brothers, they have, hey, we're both Knicks fans. We talk about the Knicks all the time because we can't talk about our feelings. Like, we never had that one neutral zone to hang out in. Yeah. And that probably would have been Game of Thrones, although he would have been one of those annoying, like, well, actually in the books, it says he would have been one of those dudes, but that's fine.
It's fine.
But anyway, it made me feel a little sad for kind of the proto nerds who laid the groundwork for the nerd dynasty under which we are currently living.
Is there anything wrong with the nerd dynasty that we're currently living in? Is there anything wrong?
I think there is, but I mean, there's problems with every subculture. I mean, I think stan culture, quote unquote, stan culture, is a fucking disease.
What
and
is
that's
that?
Not. You heard the term stan? Do you know what that means?
I don't think so.
It's a reference to the Eminem song "Stan," in which Eminem is writing. He plays the part of a guy named Stan writing a letter to Eminem, talking about how much he is obsessed with him, but it becomes threatening and almost angry about it. You know, I mean, I'm sure you've had people like this where radio show fans are like, "Oh my God," or a comedian who somebody who come up to you after show, they'll be like, "Oh my God, I love you so much. I fucking love your stuff. I loved your show." And then if you don't give them the right amount of attention, it becomes hostile. Like there's an ugly edge to it. That is what is referred to as called stanning. You know, and you'll see people on social media be like, "We are forced to stan this queen," or whatever.
Wow.
You know,
I can't believe I've never heard
of
it. Yeah. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, the term stan is defined as an extremely or excessively enthusiastic or devoted fan. That's one definition of it. But no, the Beehive, the Beyonce?
Yeah, the Beehive, you know, or and of course BTS, the sort of K-pop stans, you know. And so it's not just a nerd thing, but I do think that a lot of that incel culture and misogyny, there's a lot of crossover with nerd culture. I don't think I'm making a sweeping statement there. I just think it's quite clear. You know, things like Gamergate. And again, and a lot of that, in my opinion, comes from sort of lack of emotional intelligence or a diminishment of
people are
how important having emotional intelligence is in certain cultures.
People are drawn into certain hobbies and interests from being obsessed with sports to comic books so that they can avoid some of their own emotional stuff, avoid confronting stuff as a way to get away. Is that part of the problem with obsessing about this thing?
I think so.
Yeah.
And again, and this is where I might wander into,
especially probably true of men in general.
Yeah. I mean, I might wander into being offensive here, and I'm trying to be delicate, but when I was growing up, there was no knowledge of anything like a spectrum. You know, somebody being on the spectrum, things like Asperger's, it was not something we talked about growing up. There's like, that dude's weird. Like, that's all we knew. Do you know what I mean?
People would be mean to that kid, is just all it would be. People like,
there were weird. Kids that were quote unquote retarded, as we would say growing up. And then there were kids who were just like weirdos. Right. You know what I mean? And we didn't really have a name for that or what that meant. And yes, a lot of people were mean to them, but also a lot of times those kids were not completely easy to deal with either, you know, because they had certain emotional issues. And I think a lot of the empowerment of nerd culture has taught a lot of guys like that, mostly young men, that we were right all along. And I don't know. I sometimes worry, you know, that the kind of abuse that gets heaped on women specifically from comic book fans and things like that distresses me, and it bothers me. You know, call that what you will. No, I think every person has to be taken as an individual basis. But I mean, you know, every culture comes along with its own pros and cons.
Well said. Really well said. And very interesting. I'd not thought at all about that. And it was a great thread that you tweeted about your brother, and it led us to this conversation. And so cheers to Finther. And thank you very much for joining me, buddy. I'll let you go. I really appreciate it. What another great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, dude. Appreciate it.
Christian Finnegan. Yeah, Finnegan Fridays, everybody. Always love talking with Christian Finnegan, and he joins me every Friday regularly here on the podcast, and you love him. And look for new exciting things from Christian and I. We're talking about doing some other work together, including maybe, you know, do some dates when the world opens back up. Come out and do some headlining dates and bring our comedy acts to your town. And if you'd like that, let me know. All right, so follow him right now. Say you love him on Twitter, @ChristFinnegan. Let him know that you always enjoy his appearances here on Finnegan Fridays. #Finnegan Fridays. Also, look for that thread he wrote about his brother. It's really poignant and thoughtful. Okay, now I want to welcome back to the conversation a human rights attorney who ran for Congress in the state of Virginia. He is a writer and a really great guy, a family man. He's got a new book coming out. It's called Hannah and the Ramadan Gift. It's a children's book. And I talk about it with him a little bit. Available for pre-order now. Comes out on April 20th. We joked about the date coming out, as you can imagine, April 20th. So, a great date to have a children's book come out. We talk about that. And we talk about the horrific attacks in Atlanta and a lot more. Our multicultural society. I really love talking to him. Such a great guy. He joined us last night as well at our hangout, where he took a lot of questions, and it was really great to have him there. And I may share that as well here on the podcast at large, but it right now is just for subscribers. So sign up to join us in our hangouts, where we always have a great chat and often welcome some of our special guests so that you get to ask them questions. All right, here it is. He's on Twitter right now at Qasim Rashid, and that is also his website. Find out more in the show notes of this and every podcast. Let's do it. Qasim Rashid, there he is. Looking good, sir. Looking good. Are you?
Hard to catch up to you, my man.
Thank you. It's great to see you, man. I appreciate you joining me today. Lots and lots to talk about. But just before we get into it, I want to get just a little bit of background on you. You're a human rights attorney. You're uniquely equipped to talk about the horror that we've been seeing in this country at any time regarding hate crimes, especially as they are ethnic, especially as they are against Asian and even more women. So what is your background in human rights? How did you become even interested in the idea?
I just did what my wife told me to do. It was really that simple. I wish I had like this long, elaborate story. But it's, I think the genesis was from my parents as a kid. They kind of infused this element of whatever you do in life, whatever you do, if, service to humanity isn't at the center of it, then you're really wasting your time. And, so, going through college, getting a little bit older, relative to my infancy, being involved in community work was a critical component. There's a certain point when you realize that being an activist is good, but can only go so far. And the next, for me, logical step, and my wife Aisha is the one who encouraged me, was to go into human rights law and be able to really use the power of the law to, be a more effective advocate, be able to influence policy. And that's really where at law school I got involved with a few women's rights organizations. And so primarily focused on women's rights and religious freedom issues, but they're also intersectional too, right? Racial justice, economic justice, it's all so intersectional. So you can't really just focus on one element. Certainly you have expertise in specific areas, but you kind of touch everything. And so that's what I've been involved in the last 10, 12 years or so.
Do you think that the root of the problem is just that when there are pluralistic cultures, a lot of different type of people living in this neighborhood, community, going to this school, part of this organization, that conflict is natural as a result of fear or ignorance? Sometimes it seems like we just need to have a conversation about why we have so many problems regarding racism and hate crimes and violence in a country that is so multicultural like ours.
No, I don't think the conflict is inevitable. I don't think it's the natural result. I think it's the unnatural result of misinformation, of injustice, of deliberate policy decisions. And this is what I really want to emphasize. Professor Ibram Kendi talks about this too in his book, Stand from the Beginning, that it's not that we need to become more enlightened and then we'll end racism and misogyny and homophobia and any other phobia you want to talk about. It's that the way these things have permeated throughout society is that they've actually become very, for lack of a better word, intellectual in how they are surgically infused into society, right? Let's take slavery for example, right? Slavery is slavery. It's blatant. It's flat out. It's clear. If you're black, you are going to be a slave, and if I'm white, I'm going to be the slave master. Right? It's a very clear, no pun intended, black and white phenomenon. But after slavery was abolished, ostensibly, it wasn't in the 13th Amendment, but public slavery was abolished. You had Jim Crow, which effectually, kept black people suppressed in a similar way. It wasn't slavery anymore, but it was still a form of economic and racial oppression. And then as Jim Crow subsided, you had redlining and mass incarceration, which effectively have very, very similar impacts. And these are very intellectualized policies. And now we're seeing after this election, 253 bills across 43 states to disenfranchise Black and brown voters, right? So to basically keep them out. And so it's not a question, in my view, of cultures, clashing or people being unable to get together. It's a question of this country has never really reckoned with its founding of genocide and slavery. And we keep trying to brush it under the rug rather than acknowledge that we have systems built on injustice that need to be revived and truly aligned with our Constitution, which calls for justice, which calls for all people being equal. Until that happens, we're going to continue to see these kinds of conflicts.
So, I mean, I think I agree with you, but just to make the conversation more textured and to hear your point of view even more specifically, what you're saying is that it's not natural or normal for multicultural societies to be clashing. It comes from somewhere. It's taught, whether it be through media, through government, through parenting, whatever. It's taught. And that's really the main issue. And then you went on to talk about specifically America's history. But of course, it's my understanding that your sect of Islam, was persecuted in your homeland of Pakistan, where your parents are from. The ethnic sectarian violence within all religions throughout all time, Christianity, Islam, Judaism. There's all these clashes in countries and society throughout the world over, small sectarian differences, much less black and white. So I'm going to push you on it, even though I agree with you. Even it happens in all kinds of countries, even where people are fairly similar.
Well, I think you're always going to find examples of that. And what I would submit is that our history books don't teach enough about when folks got along really well. I'll give you a really good example. The 700 years of Moorish Spain, when Muslims ruled Spain, is called the Golden Age for a reason. Historian Gwendolyn Midlow Hall writes about this. She talks about how that for these 700 years, there was very little fighting amongst Muslims, Jews, and Christians. That while it was a Muslim-ruled country, Jews and Christians had high and influential positions, that capital punishment was abolished, that the currency and economy was strong. You want to talk about women's rights, the European contemporaries of that time used to ridicule the Moors, the Muslims, for being too influenced by their women, for giving women too much power. I mean, this was their accusation. I mean, that's not an accusation you can make of any Muslim majority country right now. Well, maybe I'm being too harsh, but the point I'm trying to make is that you had 7 centuries, 700 years, triple the length that the United States has even existed, of Muslims, Jews, and Christians living in relative harmony. And sure, it ultimately fell apart, as empires do, as governments do. But I'm willing to bet if you ask 100 people on the street what they know about that 700 years, that golden age of Spain, and we saw advancements in science and technology and mathematics, in astronomy, in physics, in vaccinations. I'm willing to bet out of those 100 people, you might find 4 or 5 that know anything about it whatsoever. So I think there has to be a review of our history as well. Even something as basic as my 7-year-old after class the other day said that the first people ever to invent a flying machine were the Wright brothers in 1902. And I asked him if he'd ever heard of a person named Abbas ibn Firnas. And he said, no. I said, well, Abbas ibn Firnas was a scientist who invented a flying machine 1,000 years before the Wright brothers. 1,000 years.
Really?
Right? Yeah, 1,000 years. A functioning flying machine 1,000 years before the Wright brothers. It's Women's History Month, right? We talk about the first woman to graduate college or the first woman to get a PhD. The first university ever established was by a Black Muslim queen named Fatima Al-Firi. It was Al-Qairoun University, right? It was established 600 years before Harvard and Oxford. And so there's, and this was a university, by the way, that the future Catholic popes went and studied in Morocco. So you had, Catholic, wealthy royals going to a Muslim majority country to learn, to study, and then go and lead the entire Catholic world. And so what we see now, I think, is not anything other than a lack of justice. And I think, you have kids, you have beautiful kids. I'm blessed with beautiful kids. You see your young kids play with other kids, and you see them get along just fine, because love is innate, hate is learned. And sometimes as adults, we need to unlearn the hate and remember what our natural core actually is.
I learned a lot, and I got some things to Google after this. I got homework. I love it. So what about the issue that always bothers me, and I understand it, but that we self-segregate, especially minorities. White people don't have as much fear, I don't think. I mean, white people definitely have fear going into certain neighborhoods. There's, I think, certain black neighborhoods for sure. I mean, how many times have you heard that? But generally speaking, in space, in public, white people don't have to worry, and even less so a white guy, even less so a white straight guy, like myself. Like, I don't really worry about people targeting me because of this beautiful vessel that I travel in. But we self-segregate. Minorities self-segregate wherever you. Let's talk any county, any school. The brown kids sit over here, the Indian kids, the Asian kids sit together here, the black kids sit together here, and it's like, if you're a white person, a well-intentioned white person, and you want to try to break into that, there's a certain trust and credibility you have to earn. And it's fascinating. It's also troubling. And I feel like minorities generally do that for safety and for trust, and then cultural similarities as well, and certain comfort languages and so on. But what do you say about the way that we choose to self-segregate in terms of where, our social lives and how we worship, et cetera?
Well, this comment you made is really interesting about, if a white person wants to kind of break into that, black clique or Asian clique or Latino clique, they kind of have to prove their merits. I mean, that's how people of color have to break into every aspect of society, whether it's education or employment or a social circle. That's like a constant struggle. And so these cliques form, I think you're right, one out of a sense of wanting to belong and wanting to just be your authentic self without having to explain or justify. You've heard of code switching, right? When people speak a different way based on who they're speaking with.
I think I'm pretty good at it.
Right. and you talk to your childhood buddies, you talk one way. Yep. In a job interview, you talk a different way. It doesn't mean you're two different people. It's just that you align yourself for the situation.
Yes.
And I don't necessarily see anything wrong with people wanting to spend time with those who have their lived experiences. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Where the problem comes in is when that takes precedence over human rights or human dignity or basic justice. There shouldn't be any reason why you refuse to speak up for another tribe facing injustice when you would speak up if your own tribe faced that same injustice as well. And that's really where the problems come in. And that injustice doesn't need to be something as overt as a hooded KKK member burning a cross in your black neighbor's lawn. Right. It could be something as simple as a racial slur, the Kung flu, and then somehow thinking that that's okay to say. Right. It's not, because it is racist, and that type of racism, that dehumanization, we know leads to incredible violence. We've seen it throughout history, and we're seeing it happen right now as well. So that's where I think the nuance really has to be.
Well, let me just take a couple steps back from where you started your response and say I realize how it sounds now when I was making it sound like this. In my case, I'm trying so hard to get into the black clique and the Indian clique. Like I love their appreciation for this food or that music, and I would like to learn more about it, but they just won't let me. And then you, of course, talking about how difficult it is for all minorities. Actually, the easiest one to me, for people to understand, is women in general breaking into boys clubs, etc. Sure. So I certainly understand it, but my point is more, I think, just about how we can live and breathe with and socialize more with folks with different backgrounds, so that the hatred that you talk about that is not innate, or the fear that is not innate, can be unlearned. I think it's hard to unlearn things if you don't have new experiences with people from different cultures. It's hard, and you learn. It's so easy to learn bullshit from putting on a pair of headphones or turning on the radio or television. That's easy to learn. It's hard to meet people and have experiences, and we're forced into and work and school often to be with people who are different backgrounds and ages even. But in my neighborhood, in my social group, in my church, whatever, we just don't choose it enough. And I wish that we could. I wish that my kids had more, mixed groups of friends and so on. We live in a pretty multicultural area, but you can't force that stuff. And I don't really have a question or point. I'm just complaining about.
Well, you're right. You're right. It has to be a conscious decision. I mean, I'm grateful to my folks. When we were growing up, we were the only Muslim family in the entire neighborhood. And it was a good sized neighborhood. I mean, I think maybe a couple of hundred houses. And
where? California?
No. This is in northern Illinois. It was outside of the suburbs of Chicago. So large Muslim population out there, but in the late 80s, early 90s, pretty small, right? But what my dad would make us do, and he would make us do it, I didn't like doing it at all at the time, but now I'm glad he did, because now I make my kids do it, is every Christmas, we would go and deliver a box of chocolate to all our neighbors, just to partake in their celebration with them. So the whole idea was, we're on their terms, we're celebrating a holiday that they appreciate, that they cherish, that they feel comfortable in. And we're saying that, hey, we recognize you and see you for who you are. And that helped not only foster relationships with us and our Christian neighbors, but for me and for my siblings growing up, it normalized for us that you can't just be stuck in your silos. You live in a world that is diverse, that is multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-faith, and you need to engage in a meaningful way, not in a tokenized way, but in a meaningful way, because then that ended up resulting in friendships with the neighbors.
Sure. Yeah, when you knock on someone's door. Yes. I love that your dad did that, and now I'm going to make fun of it and minimize it by saying that your dad made you guys all think that Christians were basically just about chocolate.
I mean, I would be hard-pressed to find a Christian who would be offended by that, to be honest with you.
We're not just about the chocolate, Christ is the reason for the season. Well, the truth is you're giving. What you're doing is you're giving. And it doesn't matter what you gave. Your dad chose chocolate because I bet you he bought an extra bag for himself and hid it somewhere. But I'm casting aspersions on your father.
We're still looking for that extra bag of chocolate. But look, and at the end of the day, what ended up happening was, when we had our religious holidays, we had neighbors deliver goodies to us as well. So there was this reciprocity, and I'm seeing that happen with my kids now as well. And I love every bit of it. I mean, that deliberate engagement, Pete, is, I think, lacking in this world. I often use this expression that engagement doesn't mean endorsement. People often say, well, I'm not going to talk to that guy because he's blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And you're right. I agree. There's a certain line, right? If you're Jewish, or anyone, and there's a Nazi terrorist saying we should kill anyone not a Nazi, yes, I understand there's not really much value in that dialogue. But at the same time, there's a wide, swath of difference between somebody you disagree with and a Nazi, right? Let's not lump people together. So just because it's somebody you vehemently disagree with on some policy issue, engaging with that person doesn't mean you're endorsing them. It just means you're getting the information from the horse's mouth. And that can go a long way.
Yeah, it's too simple to just turn people off. I mean, the idea that two people could be absolutely ideologically opposed on politics, but they're both vegan. We've got common ground. You're both vegan.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love all of what you're saying. It's also the other issue, cultural issue is that our kids today, I don't know about your neighborhood, but like they don't even go outside. So it's easier to meet people, strangers online around the world than it is your next door neighbor, because the screens are destroying this generation of kids. And, we can always have a conversation about that. Let me move on to the recent horrific attack, the worst mass shooting in years, really, in Atlanta, where Asian massage parlors were targeted, women were targeted. You've been reacting to this for the last 48 hours on Twitter. Your Twitter feed has been excellent, as always, about this. Let's start with, there's a whole bunch of kind of intersectionality here with these people that happen to be Asian, and they're women, and this kid's excuse apparently was sex addiction. What is your top line reaction to all of that, as well as how the media is interpreting it in different ways?
The top line reaction is my same reaction after the spate of bomb threats and shootings at Jewish synagogues, bombings at Muslim mosques, burnings of black churches, the El Paso shooting. It's that this was unfortunately not an accident. This was the end result of a year-long demonization of Asian Americans through powerful politicians, through media. I mean, you had people like Meghan McCain tweet out today, stop Asian hate. And exactly a year ago, she was defending calling it the Chinese virus and using these racial slurs.
Really? Was she really defending calling it? No, she wasn't.
Right? And so, you know, I was studying this. I've got an op-ed coming out soon. I was studying the history of anti-Asian racism and anti-Asian violence. There was the Chinese massacre of 1871, which was when Los Angeles was a small town of only 6,000 people. It had about 170 or so Chinese immigrants and residents. 10% of them were killed by a mob of 500 angry white people. And they were killed after a sustained campaign by media, including the LA Times, demonizing Chinese immigrants and talking about how they're taking their jobs and taking their money. And this was the end result. And that anti-Asian racism that we're seeing now, the spike that we're seeing now, this is the key part, Pete, that I really want people to understand. While we are seeing a spike right now, this is the continuation of centuries-long anti-Asian violence, culminating in 1924 with a complete ban on Asian immigration. It wasn't until 1965, I mean, just yesterday, literally, that Asian immigration was normalized. Racists would cite eugenics to prevent Koreans, Japanese, South Asians, Sikh, Punjabis from immigrating over here. And we see what the end result of that was. I mean, let's not forget Executive Order 9066, putting 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent in concentration camps. And so what needs to happen is a recognition that what the Atlanta shooting was not an accident. It was a deliberate consequence of bigotry and hate. Yeah. And until we take swift action to counter it, we risk much more of that. And that's extremely frightening.
A lot of people make the argument that it's political correctness that's destroying our country, much less specifically on this issue. The president made this point when he was called on it by Asian American journalists and those defending him. We're always told, he said, listen, that's where the virus came from. It came from China. And then people made arguments about the Spanish flu. It was called the Spanish. And they pointed to other points in history where I guess viruses were named after the origin that they came from. And so people say you can't say anything, and he says it like it is. And from what I've learned over the years, and what the main problem is, it's not political correctness. It's the idea that when a leader, someone with a huge audience especially, says something like the president, much less a congressman or the principal of the school, it gives a certain legitimacy to it, number one. And most of us can look at that and be like, God, this guy's such an idiot that he's doing that. What a jerk. What an asshole. What a racist. But there is a certain segment of people who hear it and they act on it, and they have access to guns, and it's always men. The point is, it's not political correctness. It's the idea that leaders should talk in a certain way that will not activate the most dangerous people listening. That's my rant on it, and I want to know if you disagree with anything I said and what you'd add to it.
One thing I'll add is the irony of the Spanish flu argument is that it actually originated in Kansas in an Air Force base, but no one ever calls it the Kansas flu. So even that argument doesn't make very much sense to me. And we know why the former president is blaming China. We know. And you can go back and look at his tweets in January, February, March of last year. He's praising China. He's praising them for being transparent. He's praising them for being a partner. He says that it will work out very well for America because I'm working with the Chinese government and things are going well. Once he realized that the word got out, that he downplayed it. And remember, we knew this whole time, according to the Woodward tapes, that he was well aware this is a vicious virus. It's not just a flu. He knew it was vicious, but once word got out that it was out of his control and he needed a scapegoat, it was easy to simply blame China, blame the Chinese. And I'm by no means defending that regime, right? But there's a big difference between a government, a regime, and Chinese people. And I think we need to make sure we don't conflate the two, just like there's a big difference between our government and our people, especially, and we're a democracy, so at least we have a representative government. The government of China is not representative of the people of China. We need to distinguish that as well.
Yeah, always super important, no matter who we're talking about. The Iranian people, the Russian people, the Saudis. I mean, it's so easy to demonize the people based on the choices that its repressive government in many ways makes. And so always a good lesson, but I interrupted you.
No. That's an extremely important point. So
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to, the idea that Asian American people are being targeted, and that, like, what I keep hearing is an Asian American person and a person who looks ethnically Asian. That's all it is getting like punched or attacked for no reason. Like usually these types of attacks, usually all the time, we see these videos now. They've always been happening, but now we see it happening all the time. They escalate, and it's a store and someone's not wearing a mask, and then someone goes racist or sexist or whatever it is. These Asian people are just being punched, just being attacked while waiting for the bus, standing in a corner. My question to you is, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how horrible and terrible it must be to be in a certain body that looks a certain way and have to worry just about that. And that going back to this, I never have. So my question is, when and how have you talked to your brown-skinned children about this? When and how did your parents talk to it about you, or did you learn it through experience?
Experience. I mean, look, you mentioned, I belong to the Ahmadi Muslim community. And so, we face violent persecution in Pakistan. Just yesterday, extremists destroyed another one of our mosques a few weeks ago. A couple of days ago, members of our community suffered a shooting. Fortunately, nobody was killed. Last month, several were killed. And so for me, this has kind of been an ongoing thing. Just last year, a person was convicted of trying to kill me for being Muslim, for my ethnicity. It sounds odd to say, but in a way, I've kind of come to expect that. And when someone like me, and I'm not unique in my experience, goes out in public, you enter a store, you look for the exits, you make sure you have a plan, you make sure you know where to be and what to do. When you go out with your kids, you make sure you keep an eye on them, not just for whether they're going to wander off, but it's somebody eyeing you, and you have to make sure you know what you're doing and how you need to act when a certain situation arises. It's a horrible thing to say, but that's just the reality. And I want to make sure it's not me talking about myself. This is what a lot of folks go through, but I'm sharing my experience.
I asked you about you.
Yeah, no, exactly. And look, my wife is a South Asian woman, hijab wearing, and goes out, and I know the comments that she receives, and sometimes it's as simple as when we're out, if we're about 20 feet apart, I can see how people react to her versus when I'm walking right next to her. And this is, again, an example of the misogyny that's inherent in the anti-Asian racism. Of the 3,800 reported anti-Asian hate crimes, 68% of the victims were women. And so there is a strong intersection between racism and misogyny. These racists are also misogynistic cowards as well, because they think that if they attack a woman, they have a lesser chance of being punched back. Or having to suffer consequences for it. And so that's just the reality of where we are right now. And it didn't get here overnight. It's not going to be resolved overnight. But today the House is having this week they're having a hearing on anti-Asian violence and racism. It's the first hearing since 1987. So first time in 34 years, which is long overdue. And hopefully it effectuates meaningful reform going forward.
Who did the Republicans call as their witness? Like an Asian person who hates Asian people?
I'm not even sure they're calling anybody. There was a Congressman Grace Meng of New York 6th District last September introduced a resolution to condemn anti-Asian racism as it relates to COVID-19. 164 Republicans voted against it.
What?
Hey, racism is bad. 164 Republicans said, no, it's good for us. We're gonna go ahead and keep pushing it forward. I mean, it's absurd, Pete. It's absolutely absurd.
So you can't regulate. It's very hard to stop someone from punching someone in the face on the street because of the way they look. But what we don't see in other countries that have these issues, including Canada and many others with diversity and violence, is the type of violence and the death. And the main reason is it's got to be the easy access to weapons. This kid, whose name I won't say, and I think media shouldn't say their names, he got a gun like the day before. You ran for Congress in Virginia. This is a very divisive issue in your state. How much can we do around guns, do you think, reasonably? What do you think can be done so that if there are people like this who have all kinds of issues and they decide for whatever reason they're gonna do something terrible, that they can't take so many lives with a gun?
You probably already saw the other story from last night. A guy, some white guy from Texas, got caught in front of the vice president's official residence with an AR-15 that he had bought that morning. And he was, quote unquote, going to take care of business.
Yeah, that story didn't get enough attention because of the massacre in Atlanta. But really, very important. Go ahead.
With firearms, I think, we just passed some meaningful firearm legislation, universal background checks, which 92% of Americans support. 74% of NRA members support this.
I'm sorry. You're saying we just passed it, or we should?
In the House. We just passed it in the House.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah. And I will see it pass the Senate, but it just passed the House.
So it's on its way to Senate to die a slow, painful death?
Well, hopefully not. Geez, we got to kill the filibuster too. We'll talk about that. But what I think the NRA has done a really effective job of is trying to make this seem like a divisive, hotly contested issue. It's not. 2/3 of Americans want comprehensive firearm reform, including conservatives. 93% of total Americans and 79% of Republicans want universal background. I mean, for God's sake, 74% of NRA members want universal background checks. And so, my Republican Congressman, Rob Whitman, has this bizarre fantasy that he's somehow defending American security, when in reality, he has no idea what the Constitution actually says or what the will of the people actually is, because the overwhelming poll after poll after poll shows that Americans recognize that comprehensive firearm legislation is a great way to ensure law-abiding citizens have access to firearms and use them in a responsible manner. And those who are criminals or have violent intent have a hell of a time getting access to firearms. Chief Justice Berger of the Supreme Court, a conservative Chief Justice, said that the right-wing interpretation of the Second Amendment, and these are his words, are the biggest fraud ever imposed on the American people. He saw right through it.
That was in the 70s or something, right?
Even more recent. I think it might have been late 80s even. But you can fact check me on that. But the point is that this guy is one of the most prolific conservative legal scholars of U.S. history, and he's calling out
the Second Amendment got reinterpreted in the early 80s by the NRA and activists who wanted to sell guns and ammo, and it's been taken over by the right-wing media stars, and it's more than guns and ammo. Now it's like millions in bumper stickers.
It's nuts. Well, and they're going bankrupt. And look, my thing on firearms is I grew up on firearms. I mean, my parents bought my brother a rifle when he was 16, and we would go hunting. And so I grew up target practice. My brother is a Marine, a veteran, but he still brags that he shot expert every year in the Marine Corps because of the target practice that we learned as kids. So I celebrate hunting. I celebrate firearms. I have no problem with the right to self-defense. I think it's a good thing. There's people who want to abolish the Second Amendment. I don't want to abolish the Second Amendment. I believe in the right to self-defense, but I also believe in common sense and recognizing that you don't make us safer by just allowing completely unregulated, unchecked firearms to go out and about. There's, the Onion has this recurring headline, after every mass shooting, no way to prevent this from happening, says country where this is the only place it happens in the world in reference to mass shootings.
Before we let you go, I don't know who we is. I'm looking around my shed. It's a podcast. I'm here alone. I guess the people listening and I.
Cool shed, man. It's a really cool shed.
Yeah, it's basically the greatest thing I've ever done in my life. It's hilarious. I mean, the working out of this shed in my backyard is, I can't even believe it's happening. So, but I want to ask you about your book, which is coming out, and why you wrote it. because I'm really excited to talk more about it, but I want to tease it.
Well, it is a children's book, so I'm sure it's going to be exactly what you're looking for bedtime.
It'll be a tough read for me. It'll take me a while.
Well, I'm trying to appeal to broader audiences, Pete. So
thank you.
It's called Hana and the Ramadan Gift, and Ramadan is starting in about a month, in mid-April. It comes out on April 20th. So it is not that special kind of gift, if anybody's wondering, but it is Hana and the Ramadan Gift.
No, but I would like to plug my gift, my special kind of gift. It's here in the shed somewhere. Go ahead. Sorry. you opened the door and I had to walk through it.
Look, it was funny. It was supposed to be on April 6th and they pushed it back to April 20th. I'm like, you guys, a gift on April 20th? What are you doing? You're killing me here.
It's a children's book, not a line of CBD.
It's not a special book. It's a special book, but not that kind of special. No, I wrote this because really representation matters, right? The lead character is a young girl of color, Pakistani Asian, right? And it's about her journey to understanding what Ramadan actually is. And it's a very inclusive book. So I make references to Christians and Jews and Sikhs to kind of demonstrate just the power of unity. Kind of what we were talking about earlier on in this podcast about how there's not enough meaningful dialogue and we get into our little cliques and tribes. This is a book that kind of pushes back against that and recognizes the humanity in all of us. And I wrote it because, when my wife and I first had kids, back in the 2000s, we went to find books that we could read to them that had their lived experiences. And there were very few at that time. And when I tried to pitch one, the response was there's just not a market for it. And since then, there have been some amazing books written. And finally, I found an amazing agent who kind of championed it, and she just ran with it with me, and we found an amazing publisher in Biking a Penguin who ran with it as well, and so now it's coming out, and hopefully it's a positive experience for a lot of people. We're excited about it, and hope you guys pick it up.
Hana and the Ramadan Gift. It's available on Amazon, and you can buy it now. Link to it in the show notes as well, to a link to it. But so, just real quick, what is Ramadan to you? Like, how religious are you? How observant are you of that?
I'm the most religious man in the world, Pete. So religious. I'm constantly praying.
You're the most religious man in the world?
I never know how to answer that question. How religious are you? Like on a scale of 1 to 10?
It's a dumb question. I mean, I think religion, I'm a pretty harsh critic of all religion, but I also, don't, whatever makes anybody happy, as long as it's not hurting other people. But I think religion is often like a menu, and you pick and choose from it, which is what I meant by how religious. Like, how observant are you? What practices do you follow, and why? I mean, we could talk about that for hours, I know, and maybe another time we will schedule just for that so I can learn about it. But that's what I meant.
Yeah, no, I think, the easy way for me to answer that is what Islam teaches on your faith is your relationship with God is personal. And your prayers and your worship and what you do in that personal relationship with God is something that nobody else has any right to impose upon, and you have no right to impose upon anyone else. But the most important part that Islam teaches of your purpose of existence is service to humanity. And your worship is, in fact, worthless. It's meaningless. It's offensive if that's all you're doing while your neighbor is going hungry and suffering and starving. And your neighbor isn't just the guy who lives next to you, it's literally the whole world. So your job is to do whatever you can to serve all humanity. What if your neighbor is a Trump supporter who called the town on you and said that you had to take down a certain part of your shed, even though it wasn't illegal? Do I still have to help her? If on human rights issues, yeah. I mean, maybe you don't pay their mortgage or anything, but if they're going hungry, you should get them food. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a funny story because last year, a Trump supporter sent me some really nasty Islamophobic hate. And the most vicious, disgusting things you could imagine. And I realized that he had a GoFundMe for crushing medical debt. And so I helped him fundraise over $20,000 to pay off his medical debt. That's right. That's how I discovered who you were, because that story that you did that went viral, and people can all watch the video of you guys like talk. It was amazing. I'm so glad
interrupted you now with my stupid story.
No, it was good. But that's my point, though. So you talk about like how religious, for me, that's how I define what value someone's religion has. And whether it's Muslim or Christian or Jewish or what have you, like if you're not serving people, I really don't care what you believe. I want to know what you're doing to serve humanity. And that's what this book, Conan, the Ramadan Gift, is really about. That, Ramadan is a month of fasting. It's a month of connecting with your creator. But more importantly, it's a month of really doing a self-check and saying, what value am I adding to humanity right now? Because if you're not adding value to humanity by using what you have in front of you to do your best to serve those around you, then you're missing out. And it's just a reminder, it's a recalibration to not miss out.
I learned a lot talking to you. You're a great role model for me because I get pretty angry and I have a hard time forgiving and I get, pretty impatient and reactionary. And now you're making me want to, after talking to you, go give a bag of weed to my neighbor. Your dad taught me that.
Hey man, however I can inspire, I guess I'll take it.
I don't have any chocolate.
Chocolate, special chocolate.
Qasim, so great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me, man. I look forward to talking to you again, and we will before hopefully the book is out, and I hope people will go get it. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, brother. Good to be here.
All right, Qasim Rashid, he joined us last night at the Zoom Hangout and today on the podcast. Great guy. I learned a lot from talking to him. I love hearing his perspective. Just a really kind, thoughtful, very intelligent dude. I hope he does run for office, and I hope he does win. Certainly will support him. Okay, that's it for me, everybody. That's it for the week. Thank you all for joining me whenever you did. Those of you who join every day, I can't thank you enough. Those of you who join and sign up for a paid subscription, you are the best. I hope you have an awesome weekend. If you get lonely, check in with us on the Discord platform, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Let me know who you want to hear on the show. Know that you are not alone. I love you. Hang in there. We are so close to the end of this pandemic, and I'm really excited about what's to come for the show and this community. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Take it away, John Carroll.
They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt. Down off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience. Well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. See him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up.
And here now is an appearance of mine from the summer of 2007 on NBC's Cleveland affiliate morning show, promoting my stand-up appearance at Cleveland's Hilarities. I love the anchors. We had a great time. And here's me improving at my best.
Our next guest is one of the hottest guys to hit the comedy circuit. He's
no, circus. I've been talking to him.
I've been on the circus. I started with just doing trapeze. And I would do a lot of, when the elephant will get on its trunk, I train the elephant to do that, Andrea. And the circus is not an easy life, so I don't know why you're laughing at that.
Comedian Pete Dominic, he's at Pickwick and Frolic all week long.
I feel my face so red. I meant to say comedy circuit.
There is no circuit, first of all. Whatever gigs you get, God bless you for booking me here in Cleveland. Let's first talk about how annoyingly handsome you are. It's you're not fair. God just touched. Are you even white or tan? What are you? I can't even figure out. You're flawless. I hate you. You should never get married, ever. You're what every man wants to be. Do you have a personality? I hope you don't have a personality.
That is definitely not true, everyone. No.
Look at his. Please don't get Michael and I in the same shot ever. Look at the before and after picture for Propecia or anything that makes you better. This stinks. Look at my head. I can't even go to Ash Wednesday anymore. Look at my forehead. If I show up to church, the priest will be like, he's here. Get the whole bucket of ashes, a paint roller. Look at that.
He was on a reality show, which you were going to be, but you turned
Which
it down.
show were you on?
Average Joe Hawaii.
Yeah, and you weren't one of the average Joes. I'm taking it. It was like I was the average Joe, you were the girl, and you were the guy who makes every guy like me.
Anyhow, let's talk about Last Comic Standing. You actually turned it. You were going. You started, but then you actually said
I didn't
you
get on the show like average Joe.
Man.
Yeah, I was. I made it to the semifinals of Last Comic Standing, and I then decided not to do the show, which I like talking about because I feel like it looks like I have integrity. Because these shows, like, it just wasn't for me at the time. For some people it's probably a good thing for their career, but these reality shows, I know we're on NBC and I'm not trashing the show, but these reality shows edit you to look the way they want you to look. And they wanted me not to do my radio show, which is on Sirius Satellite Radio. Everyone should subscribe every day. They didn't want me to do that.
On Raw Dog at noon every day.
On Raw Dog, the channel. And I decided I wanted to stick with that. And I like doing the radio, and I have a face for it. What are you looking at? What are you looking at?
What do you think they would have made you like if you were on the reality show? Like, what guy would you have been?
It would have been the sneaky, mischievous guy who looks a little like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons.
Who came from
Why are
the
you laughing? What do you look like? Magnum in his prime?
All right, it went on more from there. Are you still listening? You're the best. You really are. Thank you guys very much. I'll talk to you next week.